What if I told you rock's greatest guitar sound was born in a condemned flat, funded by a cheap demo, and named after the band's own poverty? A former journalist who helped cover Jimi Hendrix's death became the most precise guitarist of his generation. One album sold 30 million copies. Then a man who stopped recognizing his own roadies. Multi-million-dollar reunion offers, all refused. Not even a Hall of Fame appearance. This is the rise and fall of Dire Straits. London, 1977. Punk rock was burning through the city like a lit fuse. The Sex Pistols were on the front pages, safety pins and torn denim were everywhere. The music establishment was under siege, and the message was clear: technique didn't matter. Rules didn't matter. Volume and fury were the only currencies that counted. Into that chaos walked a 28-year-old English lecturer named Mark Knopfler, and he wanted nothing to do with any of it. Knopfler had grown up far from the London scene, absorbing the American sounds that drifted across the Atlantic, the finger-picked country blues of Chet Atkins, the laconic groove of J.J. Cale, the storytelling precision of Bob Dylan. He had worked as a journalist for the Yorkshire Evening Post, involved in coverage of Jimi Hendrix's death. He had taught English at Loughton College in Essex. He was, by every measure, a craftsman, a man who believed that restraint said more than noise ever could. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. In 1977, he gathered 3 musicians around him in the most unlikely of settings: a condemned council flat in southeast London, shared by his brother David and bass player John Illsley. Illsley was a Goldsmiths College graduate, juggling music with work tied to art and design. David Knopfler was a social worker. Drummer Pick Withers rounded out the original quartet. None of them were rock stars. None of them particularly wanted to be. They called themselves cafe racers at first. The name Dire Straits came later, suggested by a flatmate of Withers who noted with some accuracy that the band was broke. The name stuck, a monument to honest poverty. Their parents were reportedly horrified. John Illsley later recalled that his family had expected him to become an architect or a lawyer, not an unemployed strummer in a condemned building. But in that condemned flat, something extraordinary was taking shape. While the rest of London thrashed and screamed, Mark Knopfler sat quietly and played his 1961 Fender Stratocaster without a pick, just the skin of his thumb and 2 fingers against the strings, coaxing a sound that was percussive and fluid and unlike anything on the pub circuit. The punk rockers had their rage. Knopfler had something more dangerous. He had a story to tell. The song that changed everything began on a rainy night in a Deptford pub. Knopfler had wandered in out of the weather and found a mediocre jazz band playing to almost no one. They had a grandiose name. They wore dowdy clothes. They played with quiet, unassuming dedication to a room that barely noticed them. Most people would have ordered another pint and forgotten about it. Knopfler pulled out a notebook. What he wrote became Sultans of Swing, a character study so precise and so affectionate that it felt less like a rock song and more like a short story set to music. It was the sound of a man who saw the world in narrative, who found the extraordinary hidden inside the ordinary. In July 1977, the band recorded a 5-song demo in North London. The cost was approximately $200. DJ Charlie Gillett of the BBC Radio London program Honky Tonk gave the demo airplay, and the response was immediate. Enough interest built that the band secured a new record deal. Sultans of Swing was first released in the UK in 1978, but it wasn't until a reissue and heavy airplay in early 1979 that it broke internationally. Then, America found it. On FM radio stations across the United States, stations built for the album-oriented rock format that valued sophistication and sonic clarity over pop simplicity, Knopfler's clean, fluid guitar tone hit listeners like a revelation. By early 1979, Sultans of Swing had climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. For the listeners driving to work in 1979 America, hearing that solo for the first time was a moment they never forgot. The band toured the United States hard that year, 51 sold-out shows in 38 days, starting at the Paradise Club in Boston. John Illsley later recalled that Sultans of Swing seemed to be playing on every radio in every city they entered. He called it rather wonderful. America embraced Dire Straits before Britain fully understood what it had. The irony was not lost on Knopfler, but there was a deeper irony still. A band playing with such deliberate quietude, such careful restraint, had become, almost accidentally, a phenomenon.
I step inside, but you don't see too many faces.
The craftsman from Deptford had his audience. The question now was what he intended to build for them. Success, for Mark Knopfler, was never about the trappings. It was about the work, and the work was getting bigger. As Dire Straits moved into the 1980s, the albums began to stretch and breathe in new ways. Making Movies, released in October 1980, signaled an ambition that went well beyond pub rock. Knopfler brought in producer Jimmy Levine, the man behind Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run and Tom Petty's Damn the Torpedoes, and recruited Roy Bittan, the E Street Band's keyboardist, to add a cinematic sweep to the arrangements. The album's standout tracks, Romeo and Juliet and Tunnel of Love, were not rock songs so much as film scores for emotions that had no other soundtrack. Romeo and Juliet drew from a real and painful breakup. The arpeggiated National Steel guitar intro was devastatingly beautiful. Tunnel of Love wove the melody of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel Waltz through memories of a seaside fairground, creating something that felt both personal and timeless. But the making of that album also tore something irreplaceable apart. The sessions at New York's Power Station were tense. Mark Knopfler's perfectionism had always been a defining force, but under the pressure of rising expectations, it became relentless. Arguments broke out between Mark and his brother David, whose role as rhythm guitarist had grown increasingly constrained by Mark's exacting vision. By July 1980, David Knopfler walked away from the band. In a detail that spoke volumes about the dynamic, many of David's nearly completed guitar tracks were subsequently re-recorded by Mark himself. John Illsley, caught between two brothers, remained friends with both, but the estrangement between them lasted years, and the wound never fully healed. Love Over Gold followed in 1982, featuring Telegraph Road, a 14-minute epic about the rise and fall of a civilization, told through the story of a single road. It was the work of a man who was expanding his reach in every direction, chasing a sound that was growing too large for any ordinary stage to contain.
So when you gonna realize it was just at a time.
The band of brothers from the condemned Deptford flat was becoming something else entirely. Something bigger. Something that could not be undone. May 1985. The world changed. Brothers in Arms arrived in record stores on May 17th of that year, and within weeks, it was clear that something unprecedented was happening. The album did not just sell well, it sold everywhere, to everyone, simultaneously. It reached #1 in the United Kingdom, where it stayed for 14 weeks. It reached #1 in the United States, where it stayed for 9 weeks. In Australia, it held the top position for 34 weeks. Canada certified it diamond. Ultimately, Brothers in Arms sold over 30 million copies worldwide. It became the first album in history to sell 1 million copies on compact disc, and the first album to outsell its own vinyl version. Philips, the company that had helped develop the CD format, sponsored the tour specifically because Brothers in Arms was the perfect advertisement for what digital audio could do. The album's clean, high-fidelity production made every other record on the shelf sound muddy by comparison. The song that drove the machine was one born from a moment of pure observation. Knopfler had been sitting in the window display of a New York appliance store, watching a delivery man in a checkered shirt stare at MTV and muttering about the rock stars on the screen. Knopfler borrowed a pen and wrote down the man's words verbatim. "That ain't working, that's the way you do it. Money for nothing, and your chicks for free." The resulting track, Money for Nothing, featured Sting singing the falsetto hook and a guitar tone, achieved through a specific amplifier and a microphone placement that producer Neil Dorfsman later admitted he could never quite recreate. That became one of the defining sounds of the decade.
Money for nothing and your chicks for free.
The music video was groundbreaking, produced by computer visualization using the latest and greatest 3D graphics system, one of the first major rock videos to employ 3D computer animation. Knopfler, who had no interest in videos, let the technology carry the concept. It won Video of the Year at the MTV Awards in 1986. Then came Live Aid. On July 13, 1985, Dire Straits performed Money for Nothing at Wembley Stadium before a live audience and a global television broadcast reaching an estimated 1.5 billion people. They were not just successful, they were the soundtrack of the moment. The boy from Deptford was standing on top of the world, and somewhere in the back of his mind, that feeling already troubled him. The Brothers in Arms tour began on April 25, 1985, in Split, Yugoslavia, and it did not end until April 26, 1986, in Sydney, Australia. In between, there were roughly 240-plus concerts across 20-plus countries and more than 100 cities. Over 2.5 million people attended. In Australia and New Zealand alone, around 700,000 tickets were sold. By any rational measure, it was a triumph beyond reckoning. By Knopfler's own measure, it was something else entirely. The scale had become dehumanizing. Knopfler, the man who had written Sultans of Swing about a jazz band playing to a near-empty pub, who had built his entire artistic identity on the intimacy of observation, found himself at the center of a machine so massive, he no longer recognized the people who worked for him. He later recalled a moment backstage, standing in a catering tent, realizing he did not know the faces of his own truck drivers or roadies. For a man who identified himself as an observer of human life, becoming the invisible center of an anonymous apparatus was quietly shattering. There was a moment at the 1988 Nelson Mandela tribute concert when someone informed Knopfler that hundreds of millions of people were watching worldwide. Performing alongside Eric Clapton rather than under the Dire Straits banner, his reaction was not elation. It was dread. Oh, he thought, what have I done? The personal cost was no less severe. Marriages strained under the relentless travel. The band that had once gathered in a condemned flat had expanded into a touring operation of 7 to 9 professional musicians, many of them elite session players who were excellent but did not share the history. The intimate brotherhood of the Deptford years was a memory. After the tour ended, Knopfler retreated. He spent time scoring films like The Princess Bride and Last Exit to Brooklyn, rediscovering what it felt like to serve a story rather than fill a stadium. He formed the Notting Hillbillies with old friends, playing small venue roots music in a deliberate attempt to fall back in love with the act of playing guitar without 20,000 people watching. In 1988, he announced the band was taking a pause. He needed, as he put it, to get back to some kind of reality. The white light of superstardom had become too bright. Something had to give. After 3 years of silence, Dire Straits returned in 1991 with On Every Street. The album was darker, more reflective than Brothers in Arms, a record that felt less like a victory lap and more like a man taking stock of what he had built and what it had cost him. It still sold enormously. The world tour that followed drew about 7 million ticket holders across roughly 220-plus shows. By any conventional measure, they were still the biggest band on the planet, but those who were closest could feel it ending. John Illsley later wrote that by the conclusion of the On Every Street tour, he and Mark both understood the band had run its course. There was no single moment, no explosive fight, no dramatic falling out. There was simply a quiet recognition, shared between two old friends, that it was finished. The final concert took place on September 29, 1992, in Nîmes, France. The last song Dire Straits ever played live was a gentle, instrumental piece called Local Hero. Not a thunderous finale, but a quiet farewell, as understated as the men who played it. Knopfler quietly retired the Dire Straits name in 1995, and launched his solo career with the album Golden Heart, released in 1996. He built his own recording facility and began collaborating with Chet Atkins, Emmylou Harris, and other musicians who valued craft over spectacle. The offers to reunite Dire Straits came, massive multi-million-dollar offers, and Knopfler turned them all down, consistently, without apparent regret. In 2018, Dire Straits was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Knopfler did not attend the ceremony. The gesture was entirely consistent with the man. He had spent his entire career resisting the machinery of fame. He was not about to start celebrating it now. Illsley later reflected that recreating the energy of those final years would have been impossible. The best thing to do, he concluded, was to leave it the way it is. They had done the job. Now they were done. In 2024, Mark Knopfler auctioned his personal guitar collection at Christie's in London. Among the 120 instruments and amps was the hybrid guitar he had co-designed in New York, out of frustration with switching between his Stratocaster and his Les Paul during live shows. The sale raised approximately £8.8 million, much of it earmarked for charity. A man selling the tools of his superstardom was, in the most literal sense, closing the book. Over the course of their career, Dire Straits sold between 100 and 120 million records worldwide. Their influence on the craft of guitar playing remained permanent and profound. The tone Knopfler had developed, clean, finger-picked, phrased with the precision of a storyteller rather than the aggression of a showman, became a benchmark that guitarists studied and chased for decades without ever quite reaching it. But perhaps the most significant part of the legacy was what it was not. Dire Straits never reunited for a cash grab. They never released an album of diminishing returns that tarnished what had come before. They never became a nostalgia act playing state fairs and casino ballrooms, running through the hits for audiences who just wanted to feel young again. They never embarrassed themselves in the way that so many bands of their era eventually did. They simply stopped. At the top. On their own terms. Knopfler himself put it plainly, "I can't think of anything good about fame. It's not worth it." For the audience who had grown up with this music, who had heard Sultans of Swing for the first time on a car radio in 1979 and felt something shift inside them, the dignity of that exit resonated as deeply as any of the songs. It was the act of a craftsman who understood that knowing when to put down the tools was as important as knowing how to use them. The condemned flat in Deptford, the $200 demo, the rainy night in a pub where a mediocre band played to no one. That was where it began, and the sound never faded. Dire Straits proved something rare in rock and roll, that the most powerful move a band could make was knowing when to stop. They didn't burn out. They didn't fade away. They simply walked off the mountain while the view was still magnificent. For every person who heard that guitar for the first time and felt something he couldn't name, that sound is still there, untarnished and complete. What's your first Dire Straits memory? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of rock's greatest stories.